The last email they had sent out said something about that, and I think I'm on the schedule to go to the March one, and if they move it to the evening, I don't think I can go. So you would be welcome to go. I
It's
think
the
it's the
9th,
March
right?
one.
I'm not off on the dates.
I'd have to go back and look at their email. Do you remember that? Didn't they say they were
I
looking
usually
out for
like the
email?
nights.
Another one during the evening?
Days are tough for me.
That's what I was just saying.
Good
They
evening.
move it-
Happy New
I'm not
Year,
doing it.
everybody. I'm going to call this Iowa City Community School District Board meeting to order on January 9th. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience, those watching on television, and those keeping track via Twitter feed for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. At the right, we have Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Ruthina Malone, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland, J.P. Clausen, Sean Icestone, Paul Ressler, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. With that, I would like to welcome our student representatives to provide an update. City High. Good evening.
Good evening, Board of Directors. I have an update on the activities of the student body of City High School. The winter dance at City High School occurred last month on December 16th. The dance featured a student-requested playlist with an emphasis on songs in a foreign language. The canned food drive, combined with financial contributions, raised approximately 6,000 pounds of food in total for our can drive. Freshmen to seniors will be selecting their classes next week. With that, City High is introducing a program hoping to increase minority involvement in our AP programs at City High School. Mock Trial has received their case for the season, and they will be fielding 4 teams to compete, 2 of which they think has a chance of going all the way to state. And finally, girls basketball remains ranked at number 1 in the state, and wrestling is at number 6. Good job. That is all from City High School. Thank you all, and have a great 2018.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. West High. Good evening.
Hi. So since second trimester has started, there have been a lot of fundraising events that have happened. The first thing is Girl Up, which is an international organization that was created to help women in third world countries get better access to health and education. And a student brought that to our school, so we had a night of music with food donated from restaurants, and they were able to raise over $3,000, which was way over their goal, so that's pretty cool. Another thing was our school-wide can drive, which is always successful. This year we weren't able to weigh it, but in previous years it's been over 6,000 pounds, and by estimates, probably over that too. But yeah, it's really cool to see teachers encourage it, and the libraries waiving fines to get people to give to families who may not have it for the holidays and stuff. So that was cool. Other thing, another thing that's happening is West High Dance Marathon, the big event on Sunday, which will have families speaking about their experiences and music and obviously dancing. And there'll also be a hair drive on Friday, so people who would like to donate their hair, which is also a popular event. And things coming up include MLK Celebration Day, which I'm really excited for. This will include sessions over because students have been given the opportunity, if they feel compelled to speak on something so there'll be a Latinx student panel, as well as students speaking on what it means to use racial slurs even now, present day, when people think there isn't a connection. Also, there'll be sessions encouraging students of all backgrounds to join AP classes and honor classes if they're not exposed to those opportunities and aren't very familiar with that. And there'll also be, and later this month, a Friday January 26th, there'll be the Black history competition. And every year, students from West High study African American figures in art and the entertainment industry and like history who've made a difference now, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, and that's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that update. Liberty High.
Hi.
Good evening.
All right. So Liberty had its first state championships for the dance team. They were state champions in 2 categories, Pom and Contemporary, and won prestigious Judge Choice Award. The instructional leadership team continues to have focus on student learning. To that end, we have conducted 3 study nights in the library after contract hours. Teachers have given their own free time to stay and help students in school and have served over 250 students, and we'll also be having our next study night on the 23rd of Tuesday. We at Liberty will also be having a Martin Luther King Jr. Day to embrace diversity, encouraging service will be held Friday, January 12th, in addition to Keystone speaker Patty Miller, who is a 1960s Freedom Rider student, and students will also be able to get to have different sessions. Okay. December was full of many activities and victories for our school and school history with girls basketball and wrestling, and we had our first winter concerts and band, orchestra, vocal music, and show choir. So yeah, sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all for coming and sharing the accomplishments and the work that you're doing at your schools. Appreciate it very, very much. With that, we'll turn it over to the ICEA update from Brady Schutt.
Hi, President Godwin and Vice President Rotland, board members, Superintendent Murley. Thanks for having us again. Just a quick reminder, on January 27th, that's Saturday, we have the League of Women Voters of Johnson County Legislative Forum. Education is the focus. This is probably more for the audience at home, actually. 9:30 to 11:30 at the Iowa City Public Library in rooms A, B, and C. It's a really great event. Last year it was packed for the Education Forum session. I suspect the same will be true, so we hope you're all able to make it. I'd like to just say thank you from ICEA for the seats at the table. We have one here, and also at the Education Committee. That's fantastic. You know, having 3 people there, being able to be a part of that work session, we found to be very valuable, and I hope you did as well. So just, thank you for that inclusion. Anna, thanks to your advocacy and sort of oversight and work on behalf of us with substitute teachers. And I'd like to thank, Jane Fry, in the HR department for the work that she did. We were able to sign a memorandum of understanding with the district, which is going to provide compensation for teachers who were asked to cover for colleagues when subs are not available. And also give them the option to, sort of say yes or no based on what their day looks like. So it's fantastic. For our teachers, so thank you for keeping track of that for us, and it's something we'd worked on for quite a while. So I'd like to thank the district for their collaboration as well. So thanks. And I apologize, I have to run to a meeting at Northwest, so I hate that when we have a seat at the table, I'm going to be taking off, but I actually have another meeting to go to. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's right. Thank you so much. And then with that, community comment. I don't have any community comment slips tonight, so I think we'll move on into our district business and our consent agenda. Do you want to give an update, Phil, on the
Sure.
bills?
Yes. We had $3.4 million worth of, excuse me. We had $3.4 million worth of expenditures, $232,000 out of the GO bond, and an item that on page 33, we had a audit of the district's 2015 year's taxes, and we were found to be responsible to pay $38,379.84 there. It's having to do with a audit look, and Craig and Les can explain this in better detail than I can, but it would pertain to some 1099 and W-9 form interpretations, I guess, is that a fair way of saying it? And we've done the corrective actions. It's one of those things when the IRS audits your business, they're the compliance regulatory authority, you do what they say and they did not find any violation or that we had done anything to avoid it. It was just that, like I say, it was an interpretation by one body and another body in that. So if anyone has any more, questions about that, there's and I believe this is available for the public, isn't it, Craig? So there's a detailed listing of what Craig and Les went through, but for anyone looking through there, it's on page 33 of the books and that's what that's about. So every other question was answered, and that's why I don't have any questions with that at this time.
Very good. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion? Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. Phil, I'm not getting yours.
I was on another, I'm voting nay.
Nay, okay. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you for that. On to board work. We've got the director liaison reports. Are there any comments or additional points that directors would want to make about their community activity this last time period?
I just want to make a note that in meeting with the executive director, Susan Brennan of the foundation, I don't know if everyone has had that opportunity to do so, but that meeting with her was very eye-opening and in-depth to get a sense of everything that the foundation actually does provide for our district. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, I highly recommend it. It was a well-spent 60 minutes.
That's good. Thanks, Ruthina. I'll just note, I thought the Education Committee was really a great experience. I thought the conversation was good, the participation was great, the presentations were, I thought, top-notch, and it was my first Education Committee, and it was well worth the time and effort, and I look forward to all the coming ones. Okay, we'll move on to the negotiations update.
The update's pretty brief. Not a lot's happened because of break in there. So just a reminder that we will be sitting down with the three different SEIU groups, which include physical plant, the secretaries, and nutrition services. The information has been exchanged with the union representatives at this time, and I'm just waiting to hear a return then as we start looking at setting up some dates and to exchange the initial proposals.
Any questions? Thank you, Jane. Legislative update. Steve, do you want to cover this one?
Sure. So just a couple of reminders. First of all, as Brady indicated, the League of Women Voters, and maybe just to give you a little bit more information on it. So there are a series of League of Women Voters forums that are held each year during the legislative session. The first one is about education and is co-hosted by local labor organizations, the university, and the school district. And so one of the prerogatives that we've been given in the past, not every year, but most years, is the opportunity to begin the questioning. And so I did reach out to President Godwin and Vice President Rotland to see if one of them was available, and Lori's indicated she is available and can join me on that Saturday morning. And so hopefully, if things go according to plan, you'll have the opportunity to ask one of the first three questions. They usually rotate between the three groups. As Brady indicated, the last time we had this, it was very full. It kind of ebbs and flows depending on how hot a topic it is with the state legislature. So it's nice to be able to get up front and ask one of those questions. So again, we are one of the hosts for that. So thanks, Lori, for being available to help out with that. We will have our legislative forum, our private session with the legislators to talk about education here in the back of the boardroom the Friday prior to that. So everybody's welcome to attend that. And then for those of you that were watching, Governor Reynolds provided her State of the State, Condition of the State address today, and she indicated that she'll be recommending a budget with a 1.5% increase in supplemental state aid. I have to say Craig and I were pleasantly surprised to see that number in there. That's a total of $54 million in increased funding for public education for next year. One thing that might be somewhat of a concern is an expansion of 529 plans that would not only now be applicable to higher ed, but now also to K-12 education. One of the things that she did not include was any conversation about SAVE and the extension of the 1 cent sales tax. So just a couple of highlights from the session today.
Hey, Steve, have we looked at or figured out a date for ICCSD specific day on the Hill, since the UEN's doing their thing with?
I'm working with Margaret Buckton on that right now. What she's trying to do is look at when committees are meeting, at least when the tentative schedules have been released right now, to try to target a date so we could get there at one of those critical junctures. I'm hoping to hear back from her by the end of the week and get something out. I know at the last DPO meeting we had a lot of parents that were interested in that. The IASB Day on the Hill is listed on there. One of the prohibitive things about taking members of the community there is that there's a registration fee for it. So that's one of the reasons we're looking to go separately, and we're going to coordinate with Margaret, and she'll get a date set up for us that she thinks will be most impactful for us. So I'm hoping to have that by the end of the week.
Okay, thanks. I know that the UEN day is it's a board meeting night. I think we'd all be running back here trying to get into meetings would be difficult. So.
And the IASB Day on the Hill is the same night as our next Education Committee meeting, so
Yep.
so
Scheduling
probably won't be making that
issues.
either.
Yeah. Other questions or feedback for Steve? Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to move on to teaching and learning, the school update, secondary schools. I believe, Matt, you're going to lead this?
You bet. Apologize that you received this document late. We wanted to try to make it as accurate as possible. I anticipate, just like Amy and Steve worked through the elementary one, we continue to have some minor tweaks here and there as buildings continue to review their hours and as we have things change throughout the year. But what you have in front of you there shows 3 big categories, and the first one really talks about kind of teaching FTE and support committed in that regard. The second group in the green, we labeled support roles or support FTE. That includes everything from principals to counselors and nurses. And then the last one is more of an hourly based figure for secretary and associate hours. And you'll notice I did not provide a breakdown of the hours per student on that one. It was kind of funky when we did that. So as I was working with my assistant Lisa, we kind of went back and forth there, and the numbers averages out to 5, 6, 7, 8 in there, and I could definitely add that column if you'd find that beneficial. We have that document as well, but I just didn't think it told much of a story there to break it down on the hours based on students in that last column. But as you walk across there, then you see all 7 of the secondary attendance centers. And then, as I was referencing, that last group doesn't have that summation column. The other 2 do, so it divides the number of students by the total certified FTE and the number of students divided by that support FTE. And I think you see some pretty good balance there. The ones where we would have some outliers, as you can tell, are North Central, a little bit larger. As we've looked at it, class size and enrollment report, you'll see that some larger classes there. West High, as we've worked to use some of those staff members in service at Liberty, a little bit larger ratio there as well. But you see our junior highs between Northwest and Southeast, very evenly balanced. City and Liberty are pretty much right on target with each other there. So as we work through that process with Liberty and West this year, I expect those numbers to level out even more as we transition fully over to Liberty High School here in the next year or two. So Without walking through, every cell there, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if there's any more explanation I could provide to that document. But we thought that it included, what you'd want to see as important positions or things we see as important roles in those buildings to break out by category, and think it tells a pretty good story about the level of staffing we have across the board.
Questions?
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Quick question, can you explain why North Central is the only building without a student advisory center, FTE?
Yeah, so Student Advisory Center is funded out of our at-risk and dropout prevention dollars. And so my experience of that when I started as principal at Southeast, that was a new program. And I think it started at Southeast and then grew to Northwest just as a need basis based on the amount of at-risk students that were being served and some of the programming that they felt was necessary at the time for that. That hasn't necessarily been communicated as a need from North Central to start that program. Certainly something we could look at, but right now that programming is just at Northwest and Southeast.
And Brady spoke about some successes and everything on subs and everything that way. At North Central, it looks like we're in the red on the FTEs, and then we're in the red on the subs. Or is that one we're addressing, or?
I think the classroom sections, I've worked closely with Principal Miller about his staffing level there, and we feel good about how they've tried to work through larger class sizes as they've had them. Obviously, we always want smaller class sizes. We'd like to have more staff in those situations. So while we haven't implemented a full RAM model either, I think that's a little bit of what you see based on between Southeast and Northwest in comparison to North Central with a lower free and reduced lunch percentage, fewer at-risk students. We've kind of naturally allowed those class sizes to be a little bit larger than the Northwest and Southeast.
Okay. Is this a new document, or did we get one of these last year?
No, this is new. We kind of patterned that off what you saw for elementary, and thought that it would be a good idea to do that same overview for secondary.
Okay.
Do you have just kind of ballpark how, these are current numbers, and I just wonder how it's kind of changed throughout, we're half a year in, because, a lot of our conversation around just how staffing and stuff is going is because we've heard from folks how the year had gone up to a certain point. I'm just kind of curious, have we increased? Have we shuffled stuff around? For instance, the full-time dean that we talked about at Northwest now. Has there been a lot of change since the beginning of the year in these numbers, do you think?
I think the changes, if I would have produced this document for you in August compared to now, we've increased staff at Liberty High School and at Northwest High School to address, or at Northwest Junior High to address needs as they came up. The shifting of the dean that you mentioned was another movement, but those would be the three I would point to that you would have seen changes in, where we would have added staff that wouldn't have appeared here at the beginning. Otherwise, we've been pretty stable in our other attendance centers since August 1st about what those numbers and class sizes would have looked like. But as we opened Liberty and saw kind of that influx of those extra students that we weren't necessarily anticipating throughout the spring and early summer, and then the same thing at Northwest Junior High, we've tried to address those staffing questions I talked to you about here a little bit last time.
Thanks.
Comments or questions? I know this did very directly come out of the discussion around Northwest, and so interesting to hear, to see the data, first of all, at the secondary level, and then just the comment that you made, Matt, around some of the shifts that have happened since August to try to address what we've been seeing this year in Northwest and Liberty. Other comments or questions from directors? Steve, would you like to add anything?
I think one of the things that came up earlier, and Matt addressed this, was we haven't done the same kind of weighted resource allocation model implementation at the secondary level, partially because there aren't as many buildings. You're dealing with 3 junior highs and 4 high schools when you include Tate, so there's not as much from an N. There's not as many in there, and so it's not as easy to cluster them and then do that. And so part of what we did when we looked at these numbers was we looked at it to say, has the staffing process that we've been using been reflective of the intent of the weighted resource allocation model. And I think Phil pulled that out when he looked at the differential that we see in particular at the junior high, where there's a little bit more disparity between North Central and Southeast and Northwest, and at the high school level where there's a little bit more of a disparity between where West is at this year and where City is at. And so I think we see that reflected in there without a deliberate implementation of it as was done at the elementary level. So I think that's a positive from the staffing standpoint, and I think from the recognition at the building level of where that ebb and flow is and where they can give a little and expect to receive a little bit more.
Do you expect this is something that will, a view of the data that we'll continue to see as we do with the elementary level?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to use this document and update it. I think it was beneficial for us, like Steve said, to make sure that intent's matching reality in all those cases and not just looking at classroom or class sizes. You know, it gives us a more comprehensive overview. One final note I failed to mention is in describing that, if you look at it closer, you're going to see a much higher number of associate and secretary hours at City High. That's particularly attributed to the amount of special ed programming at City High, so the special education para hours that are involved there to deliver those IEP and health services for those students. So that's the outlier in that last column.
Got it. Other comments or questions? Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the update. Very helpful. PE waiver.
This is
me
an
too.
annual one, and Matt's going to handle that.
Yeah. So this is an annual waiver that we ask for from the Department of Education, and it really addresses our offering of physical education in a trimester format instead of running that throughout the course of a whole calendar year or whole academic year for our students, that it's clustered into a trimester where they have that experience for every day instead of having to do an every other day format that would run that for the course of the year. Since code more directly asks that experience be an academic year, we have to apply for a waiver to offer it in that way, shape, or form. Other districts in Iowa do this. It's pretty common, but it's something we've just been now yearly keeping up on because I think when we started, we found out our waiver was out of compliance, and we had to get that on the board agenda to make sure we could continue to do that. But this is about the third or fourth year we've put this in front of you.
Yeah, and every time it scares me because I couldn't go to my physician who has told me to be more active and tell him that, oh, I'll take care of it in a third of the year, and that'll cover me for the other 2/3. And I get from staff that, you have some students that, if their schedule's active enough or something, or full, that, they never really do take PE. Can you dispel those fears of mine, or do we do any testing to see that, when the students are taking it, what their fitness level is the next year when they come in?
I'm not sure what we would track for data points on that, Phil, as far as fitness level for students. I think the piece I can address is students can have apply for waivers for different reasons. One of those would be if they're in a physical activity their senior year. If they have a full academic load, they can apply for a PE waiver as well. I think to your point about the bunching it in a trimester, versus spreading it out the whole year, like your analogy of the physician here, I think that's a relevant point. I think that's why they ask us to apply for the waiver. The kind of consequence for us as we worked through this a few years ago would have been, obviously students trying to fit that into their schedule for a full year, and then the staffing to go along with that, because obviously we'd have a lot more students. We'd require a lot more teachers to run those PE programs throughout the year. So that was a concern of ours at the time. Not to say, this is necessarily the lease on the best way to do it, but we felt to match our current format and the situation we're in, this was the best way to go forward at that time, and it's continued, and it seems to work for us. And I think the other thing we know is that we do have a lot of our students active and participating in a lot of activities, and so with that Healthy Kids requirement too, the state has, they haven't been monitoring that as much, but there is that physical activity requirement for outside of school as well.
Do you need a motion from us?
Yeah, I think we need to have that approved.
I move we approve the physical education waiver request for the 2018-2019 school year.
I second it.
Any further comments or questions? Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Istone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Next up, operational work. We have 3 district calendars in front of us to review and approve. This one also requires a motion.
It does. And so just by way of a quick preamble for you, we used to do one calendar at a time. We struggled often, JP may remember this, we struggled to get them done in a timely manner. We had lots of concerns from parents and community members about not being able to plan far ahead. So we went to the calendar committee several years ago and talked about actually developing 3 years worth of calendars. We've got several fixed parameters that are either related to our geographical location here in Iowa City or to our collective bargaining agreements that have some pretty specific dates that we have to work around. And so it made it a fairly straightforward process for us to begin working ahead. And so we now always cast out 3 years and have 3 years worth of calendars. You'll note on the attachments, there's a calendar committee memo on there. Our calendar committee consists of representatives from our organized labor groups, representatives from our elementary and secondary teachers, our elementary and secondary principals. We've got several district administrators that sit on that committee, and then they work collectively within those parameters that are also included on there to generate those 3 calendars. By looking forward, they're able to work fairly quickly now because each year they add another one to the end, and then they're able to go through and do any refining that they need to on the first 2 that are on the docket again. So this has become, I think this is our 3rd year now of doing this, and it's nice to have that forward look on it, and we would certainly entertain any questions that you have. No significant changes for the 18-19 calendar year and the addition of the 2021 calendar.
I was struck by the consensus of the committee in terms of the recommendation that weighed with me in terms of the diversity of the group that goes through this process, so I appreciated that.
Maybe one quick note to add, too. I apologize, I forgot to add that. In previous years, one of the things that was asked at the board table was for the committee to take a look at possible start date changes. And again, just for some context, we run a 175-day calendar. If you note in the state statutes and in the calendar parameters, we have to have a minimum of 1,080 hours. Several years ago when we worked, when Lori worked with the start of the school day issue and we changed the start of the elementary day, we were able to add 50 hours of instructional time at the elementary level, and part of that compromise then was to squeeze our rectangle a little bit and go to 175 days. And then the question was asked, is there any possibility with that shorter start date of starting later in the fall, perhaps even after Labor Day? That was taken to the calendar committee. They looked at it. Their concern was when that would push the end of the school year. So their unanimous recommendation to us was to maintain the start and stop dates that you have in the calendars there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I like the list of people that are listed here as the members of the calendar committee. I don't know that I'd seen in the past how many people that included, and I do see some names there of people that I've heard from before about their thoughts. So I'm glad to see that it's very inclusive. One thing I've heard the teachers talk about, and I'm sure they discussed, and maybe you can just provide context, is the discussion about getting rid of the Thursday early outs versus having more work days for the teachers where they have a whole day of learning as opposed to trying to shove those meetings in 2 hours. And maybe you can just address
Absolutely.
how the committee discussed that.
So I think one of the big things that was a concern was when we went to the new school hours, there's less overlap between our elementary and secondary staff work days, which means there's less collaboration time on Thursday than there used to be, where they used to have time that lined up. It's now staggered, and so our elementary and secondary teachers have far less time to collaborate together. And also, as you know, our district north to south, east to west, large, long travel time. If you actually want to get people together in the same building at the same time, that's really hard to do, so they've had to move to electronic conversations for some of them. And so the conversation that has now started is, can we look at perhaps moving to some other methodology other than the Thursday early out? Are we out early for a half a day? Is it a full day? What does that look like? So we meet every other week with representatives from the ICEA. We've started that conversation with them, put a committee together to start taking a look at that, consider what our options are, and also look at it from the standpoint of how does that align with our families and their needs, and how can we make sure that whatever changes we might entertain are not only going to be good for us instructionally in terms of providing professional development for our teachers, but also how does that interface with families and their needs and their ability to work around our schedule.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you're having that discussion, and I presume that if the group decided there needed to be a change, then you'd just come to us and we'd make a change.
Yes, and we actually talked to the calendar committee about that, so they know if there's that type of change that the board then institutes, then they would come back and make those adjustments on the calendar.
Motion to approve?
Well, I have a
Please.
couple questions first. With the changes from days to hours, or I guess it's essentially minutes to, and the advisory period that we have at our secondary level, haven't we shortened the number of days, teaching days, by doing those two things?
We've shortened the number of teaching days from 180 to 175.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but when you add up the time and the advisory period and everything like that, we haven't had to take anything out of our curriculum for a lack of time to do it?
No, I'd defer to Matt if he's got any additional feedback on that, but I know that was part of that conversation that happened during the study of the school day in the calendar, and there were concerns expressed at that time about moving to a shorter day and how that would impact the trimesters. And so one of the things that I would call your attention to is as you look at the division of days within the trimesters, we're very careful to make sure that we try to create balance, also anticipate inclement weather, and make sure that there's a balance there so that students aren't, there's no disparity between the amount of instructional time they get during a first try, second try, or third try course, or overall during the course of the year. So Matt, I don't know if you've got any additional information to add.
Yeah, to do the advisory time, of course, some time was shaved off the periods of the school day, but that was something the principals worked with their leadership teams in the building to create that opportunity. You know, the intent of that time is for reteaching, for students to have access to their teachers. You know, they may not otherwise have the ability for teachers to call in students that need some additional instruction or that may have missed instruction. I think we've had good anecdotal success and some data to back that up on increased passing grades and relationships with staff to support that. So there is an advisory time in some way, shape, or form at all of our secondary buildings to do that. And yes, to fit that in the day, that did take some minutes off the instruction time. But to answer your question, Phil, no, we didn't have to remove anything from our curriculum to do that. It compresses the time.
Units
but,
from
yep.
existing curriculum didn't have to be removed.
Exactly, yep.
I just have one quick question. I noticed that, you know, we tend to have early out every day of the week, the first week of school, and that it clearly differs how many days that is. You know, if you look at the 1920 calendar, school starts on a Friday. That's one day. The very next year, it starts on a Monday. So that's 5 days of early outs. That seems weird to me. I'm not going to second guess the calendar committee, but is there contracted time there? I mean, that's a lot of days adding up there. And then because of that, where that starts, then the year ends with the teacher workday having to come back the day after Memorial Day to come in and finish up. And that those dates seem weird to me, and I just kind of weird.
So a couple,
that way.
Yep, absolutely, great questions. A couple of quick comments. So first of all, on the early outs, from a historical legacy standpoint, the early outs were put in place because of issues with heat at the elementary level. So that's something that we anticipate within the next couple of years is no longer going to be a substantial issue for us. And the calendar committee's already had conversations about the merit of keeping them, especially with our secondary students going later in the day, and our air conditioning being a couple of years out at the secondary level. And so they are having that conversation right now. And you're right, it depends on how many days of the week there are, and it really was related to heat. And so that conversation's ongoing right now, so I think you're going to see a change in that over time. The state does not allow us to start school earlier than August 23rd, and so that has created some challenges for us on those opening days. It'd be nice if the 23rd was a Monday every year, and unfortunately it's not, so we have to work around that. And
That's a bigger calendar committee.
Yeah, so that's caused some real concerns for the calendar committee on what's the appropriate start date. And then I mentioned this earlier, so one of their challenges is they know when the winter break falls, they know when the spring break falls, and now their task is to look at that start date, that end date, and the balance in trimesters over the course of time, and that has some influence on that initial start date of the school year. And so I know the feedback from the calendar committee was a lot of consternation about a Friday start. I know that actually delayed us getting the calendars to you because they spent a lot of time looking at that and debating the merits of that and how to work around that. And their question then became, is it better to have them come in on a Friday or to come back on a Monday? Because then Monday would have been the last day of school at the end of the school year. In the end, I guess the lesser of two evils was to start on Friday rather than finish on Monday.
Fair enough.
So not a good choice. We also looked out at future calendars. Does not happen very often. So it's kind of a one-off
Something else that
for
probably
us.
won't happen very often, but I'm going to bring it up because it's not on any of these three calendars. But I heard some feedback from this year from some teachers that said, hey, next time Christmas is on a Monday, can you not have us go through school through Friday because it's chaos? And they'd like a little more time prior to Christmas, so maybe we can keep that in mind for
That was pretty
2-3
consistent.
years down the road after
Pretty
these
consistent
calendars.
feedback, and we've shared that with the calendar committee too.
Elementary school early outs, this should be the last year for that though, right?
Right, and like I said, they're part of their consideration with the early outs that are scheduled, that are pre-arranged in the schedule, was looking at the impact on the secondary schools and knowing that there's still some challenges with us getting that fully air-conditioned over the course of the next couple of years. And like I said, they've had that conversation recognizing that they may be less relevant in the future than they are right now.
I move that we approve the district calendars for 2018-19, 2019-20, and 2020-21 as recommended by the calendar committee.
I'll second that.
Any further comments or discussion? Vote.
Whoops, I just closed it again. Online voting is open. Phil, I didn't get yours.
Oh, it disappeared. A nay.
All votes have been cast and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Appendix 9, Dwayne?
Thank you. We have 4 projects with 5 requests. And the first one is Step 9, which is substantial completion, and Step 10, project acceptance of the playground at Shimmick Elementary School. And this approval would release $6,675 left in the retaining. At City High School, we went through a process and are asking that you award a design contract to BLDD Architects out of Davenport. In that process, we solicited 17 design firms' proposals from them. We received 9 that were interested. It was a little more difficult proposal because we emphasized that there will be some community meetings and some interaction with those folks over there and some additional work involved with this contract. So I think a couple of them took heed of that. And we were really, I wouldn't say critical, but very careful to select firms that had good public speakers and could handle a diverse crowd and different types of input. So we looked at those 9 in-house, and basically we reduced it to half. I think it was either 5 or maybe even 6. And we looked at things like their cost containment methods, their construction administration, who they're going to have lead their group, their design procedures, their identified engineering, mechanical, and civil engineering consultants, food service consultant. History with the district was important. And We checked some of the references and some of the projects that they had. The fees ranged from 5.95% to 8.4%. We presented those last 5 or 6, as I recall, to the staff at City High, and John Bacon and his staff reviewed those proposals and came back with their recommendation with our concurrence to interview 4 firms. We interviewed Shive Hattery, FRK, they're out of Des Moines, SVPA, who did Liberty High School. Shive Hattery, most of you are familiar with their local firm, and BLDD. We had an interview team, I listed here 12, but I think it was more like 14. We had City High administrators, we had district administrators, we had City High teachers. We had 2 students from City High, and they were just, I have to say, delightful and well-prepared. They really were. And we also had a couple community members. We had Ron Knox, who's the city engineer, head engineer. We also had Jean Georgeson, who's a long community activist, and she was there. And it was a time well spent. It took about 5 hours to get through the process, and their recommendation to you is BLDD Architects of Davenport, Iowa, and their fee is at 6.95%, which is very competitive, but also very appropriate considering the additional work that we're asking them to do. And the last item, then 2 more items, Hoover East, substantial completion, which allows us to release the retainage. The retainage right now is at $692,000, thereabouts. We probably wouldn't release it all. There's still a couple little punch list items left to do, but I would say 98, 99% done. So we're very happy with the progress. We even had them come back and redo some work over winter break. Not their cause, but at our request. It went well. And then the last project is Lucas Elementary, and we're recommending that you accept that project. And with that, I'd answer any questions you might have.
Move that we approve Appendix 9, and we can discuss after the motion. If there's any discussion.
Comments, questions? We're a quiet bunch tonight.
Oh, boy.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you, Dwayne, for the update. Okay, we're moving into agenda setting for the January 23rd board meeting. There's standard consent items, I believe, are on the agenda, and some items coming forward. The FFA Steering Committee report. Do you have any comments on that, Phil? Or
Yes, we want that on the agenda for the 23rd.
Very good. I know that we've got so far an enrollment demographics class size report under the operational work. The certified budget review assumptions is also slated. A facilities master plan update, and I believe what this is a process that we would follow if we're considering the acceleration plan. And so we've approved some design activities for the first few projects. We had some discussion around if we were to accelerate the entire plan, what would that take? And the request was sort of what's the process, what are the steps, what are the activities, engagement, communications that we need to go through, the data we need to review, et cetera, to feel confident going into that discussion to really debate the full acceleration or not. So I think your team will be presenting what that process looks like.
Right, one of the things we really wanted to share with you are some of the key dates in that process. So if it is something you want to entertain, here are the dates you need to consider, and if you don't, that's fine, but if you do want to consider those, then here are the dates that we would want to look as we move forward to target for agenda setting.
Any other agenda items that directors would like to see on the January 23rd meeting?
I had asked at the last meeting about transportation update. I think, actually, Dr. Hansel, though, you weren't here. So we discussed that the committee was meeting again and when the right time would be for that. Is there any more information on that?
Probably want me to answer it. I think that first February meeting would be a good one to put it on. We're going to have another meeting here yet in January, so to have any materials ready for you, I don't think we'd be ready for that 23rd meeting, but the first one in February, we could come back with an update. I think there was two focus of that, if you remember, the activity busing, continued talk about that, and then modeling the secondary after the attendance support busing like elementary instead of the discretionary busing model we have. So we'd like to come back with those two pieces.
That's good. So the
That work
first.
for you, Craig? Great,
Good.
Thank
We'll
you.
cite that for the first February meeting then. Anything from you, Steve, or your
Yeah,
team?
Just to look forward, I know that we're looking at the next meeting, but just as you think about, as we follow up with some of the work that's happening out there, I know special education is still on our radar, and working with our external support, we will be doing the survey to the community on the district develop service delivery plan for special education. So that's going to be released. It'll be out on the website. We'll have versions out there for parents, community members, and staff, and that'll be right out on the main page of the website. So as we gather that data, that's something that we're going to want to make sure that we get back in front of the board as soon as we're able to get that in and get that collated. So just something to hang on to as you're thinking forward into your agenda setting process. So that survey will go live, and as soon as we've got that data available, we'll let you know so that we can get that on the agenda as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
One thing, I'm hoping that we can get an update from the Equity Committee. I should have mentioned this at our, during director report, but I went to the Equity Committee and it was a great, robust discussion, lengthy meeting, but really a lot of information. And they're requesting, they have a real timeline of the way that they're tackling equity, and they've got it mapped out pretty well. They're requesting, they would like to do an update on the second meeting of every month, just a general, this is what equity's doing, and they promised they'd make it really worth our time, they'd have something of substance every time. And so I think maybe if they were to present at the next meeting, they could actually kind of give their pitch as to why they want that and why they're looking to have a regular kind of update to the board.
And you want to put that probably at the beginning of the meeting, like where we have our student representatives and ICA.
Yeah, I'm thinking it would
and
probably
then
some-
they could come in and do that, so they wouldn't have to wait to the end of the meeting.
I think if they come in and present what they've got, we can maybe talk as a board how that would, if
we
that's
can-
something we want to do, how that would look.
Yeah, I think we could do that with.
So for the January 23rd meeting?
Yeah,
have
just to
them
get an
come-
update, and they can kind
Perfect.
of give us their pitch, and,
Yeah.
yeah, great. They're doing a lot of good work.
All right. Any other items? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
So shy about it. All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you so much.
Would you like
Oh, no.
for the?